Today I'm going to present a number of works by artists who explore the ecology of place. Works range from temporal environmental interventions to city forests, from hybrid objects to community garden spaces. And what links these works and the variable approaches as manifested by the artists is their interest in environmental issues such as land use, trade, climate change, fossil fuels, including community access and the craft of seed saving and the rights to grow. This is practiced through a shared platform known as TEK, which is TEK, and it translates as traditional ecological knowledge. And this particular system evolves from people's direct experience with working with soil, seeds, and plants, systems that intuitively respond to their external environment and variable conditions within. Grade one, I'm going to begin with the pioneer environmental artist Agnes Denes. She was born in Budapest in Hungary in 1931, raised in Sweden, and she was educated in the United States. And she began her career as a painter, but turned to new modes of art making in the 1960s. She created what are considered to be the first public artworks to engage with ecological concerns. Over her 5-decade-long career and counting, Denes has tackled a variety of subjects from mathematics to philosophy, linguistics, psychology, poetry, history, and music. A key project that embodies her engagement with socio-environmental issues includes this work here, titled Wheatfield, A Confrontation, Battery Park, downtown Manhattan, 1982. So the description of the work. In 1982, 2 acres of wheat were planted and harvested by her on Battery Park, landfill site in Manhattan. Denes and her team brought in 200 truckloads of dirt. They hand dug 285 furrows, cleared the rocks and garbage, and then hand planted the seeds, covering each of the furrows with soil. They maintained the field for 4 months. This included manning an irrigation system, weeding, fertilizing, and tackling pest control. On the 16th of August, the crop was harvested. It yielded almost 1,000 pounds of healthy golden wheat. The grain then traveled to 28 cities around the world in an international exhibition called the International Art Show for the End of World Hunger. Other artists included in this show were Joseph Beuys, Namjoon Pak, A.R. Penk, Robert Rauschenberg, and Gerhard Richter, amongst others. The exhibition statement read as follows: "This show exemplified how art can be used to raise our consciousness of the problems of hunger throughout the world." After the exhibition, the seeds were then carried away by people who planted them in many parts of the globe, although I have yet to find any documentation of these events. In terms of a legacy for the project, documentations of these world plantings and the possible conversations that were generated in this collective process would have been really interesting to see or read about. It would also be interesting to know whether the seeds collected are still in circulation to this day. The wheat crop is a common grass that has become a staple food of millions of people. Cultivation can be traced back to Southeast Turkey about 10,000 years ago. To this day, it continues to be one of the most important food grain sources for humans and animals. So for Denes, Wheatfield was a symbol, a universal concept representing the direct relationship between world trade economics to the power of agriculture controlled by a few pharma companies on a global scale. So the second work is also took place and is still taking place in New York. However, unlike Denes Wheatfields project, described as a temporal, seasonal, unique event, Alan Sonfist's project titled Time Landscape, or also referred to as Native Forest Landscape, is a permanent work locked into its own environmental context. And I had an opportunity to visit this project in 2019. But just a brief note, just in case people aren't familiar with Sonfist's work, before I outline the scale of his project. He is considered one of the pioneers of the land art movement and has been involved with environmental installations around the world. And his works are included at the Museum of Modern Art and at the Whitney. And his practice fuses a hybrid of materials and approaches. And land art was part of the wider conceptual art movement in the 1960s and 70s, where mechanical earth moving equipment was used to make their artworks. Other artists made minimal and temporal interventions in the landscape, such as Richard Long, who simply walked up and down until he had made a mark in the earth. And this spiral jetty by Smithson in the 1970s. Land art, which is also known as earth art, was usually documented in artworks using photographs and maps, which the artist could exhibit in a gallery. Land artists also made land art in the gallery itself by bringing in material from the landscape and using it to create installations. So back to Sonfist's time landscape. So it's considered a living monument to the forest that once blanketed Manhattan Island. And he originally proposed the project in 1965. And after a 10-year period of extensive research, which included a review of old Dutch records of lumber supplies, where he also read account of their walks to their favorite streams, he also collected historical and botanical traces of the site and utilized topological maps of the region held at the New York Historical Society. Sonfist and local community members used a palette of native trees, shrubs, wild grasses, flowers, plants, rocks, and earth to plant the 25-foot by 40-foot rectangular plot, which you can see in this old black and white photograph, at the northeast corner of LaGuardia Place and West Houston Street. The results of their effort is a slowly developing forest that represents the Manhattan landscape inhabited by Native Americans and encountered by Dutch settlers in the early 17th century. And there's a photograph of it fairly newly planted and in autumn time. And this is a photograph of when I visit the actual space. So Sonfist outlines his methodology as akin to that of an archaeologist, activities which require a digging up of the past to bring into the present, almost similar to what a farmer would do in terms of sowing and digging. In the evolution of this work, we also include how the immaterial forces of nature, such as light, heat, wind, and the circular growth and decay of biological matter contribute to the expansive development of this forest as a microhabitat for the communities of critters that embed the soil, feed from the plants, and frequent the site for pollen. Compost of memories and identifications. Sonfist has written that any form is one stage in a continuum shaped by other factors often invisible, full stop. So the time landscape has its origins in his life, including memories of trees. It transgresses what we expect large-scale public monuments are compacting geological and biological time into small space. However, it is not without its critiques, which perhaps we can delve into at some stage. One thing that I struggle with in relation to this site is its clear lack of access. It can only be experienced standing from outside the fence, and there is no public entry. And this draws up some interesting questions around this site. Its aspiration as a monument to the past, ideas around rewilding of a space. And rewilding has been defined as a returning, in brackets, land to a wilder and more natural state. But in truth, the term has a complex history and a host of meanings have been ascribed to it. It is one of those terms that can generate a host of discussions and attitudes to nature, which in itself is a good thing. My interest in Sonfist is how he portrays the need to care for the earth from a microcosm and macrocosm perspective. this work in particular acknowledges that for both systems to thrive, sustainable environments must be the backbone of our cities. The city is a living construct that gives life to both urban and natural ecosystem. This work brings forth the critical need as we look to the future for identifying that balance between urban and rural and between man-made and natural. And what was interesting also about the space was directly opposite is a community garden. And so I could visit the community garden. So it was quite interesting to see how vibrant the community garden was thriving as opposed to Sonfus forest. So it brought up really interesting kind of questions about cultivation and management and I think in the end, what I was thinking about afterwards was that what he was providing was a space for all the creatures that we don't really see, those the worms and the birds and I thought, so even though it didn't look very lush as a garden could look, but then it's not really meant to be a garden. So I think there's lots of interesting kind of dichotomies with that piece, which I think is ever evolving really over time. And that's an example, say, of the community garden that was opposite Sonfus forest. So as you can see, it's the height of summer and it's blooming. So I'm moving on to a piece of work from Joseph Beuys, which is on show at the Kew Lane, and it's titled Irish Energies. And it was made from one of his many frequent visits to Ireland in 1974. And these are some photographs on show, I believe, and they're from Caroline Tisdale's work with Beuys. And you can see the briquette piece down on the right-hand side. I think that's a close-up of the work. So I'm just going to talk about this work in particular and sort of open up maybe a kind of discussion about it maybe. So he assembled, so the materials for the work are local, and he assembled peat briquettes and coal with butter. And I thought we could approach this work maybe under the guidance of the philosophers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's ideas around the assemblage. And it may provide an entry point in generating an understanding of this complex work. An assemblage in the Deleuzian sense can be both material and conceptually driven. And it's a process that combines all kinds of matter, both human and non-human, to intersect and collapse known systems. And this can lead to a convergence of disciplines and phenomena. So Beuys had a particular attraction to fossil fuels, dead plant material, which are created over vast geological timescales. And in some way, this work exemplifies Beuys' unorthodox use of and in combination with other materials. So this work is currently shown in the Kew Lane, but it's there's also a reconstruction by the artist Sean Lynch. But my focus will not be on Lynch's remaking of the work. Rather, I'm interested in exploring Beuys' interest in land and agriculture and his challenge to Cartesian models of practice. That is, if we understand the Cartesian model as mechanistic, unchanging, and unrelated closed system of parts, how we read this piece perhaps serves as a bridge to enter into the seemingly disconnected worlds of art and agriculture, and is open to many interpretations. And this is, I feel, its success as an artwork, which means that the work engages on multiple levels of meaning and access through both the visual and the textual. I like to think about this work in terms of Beuys' interest in food and his connection to the land. The work is suggestive of the dualistic nature of the world: fuel, fat, energy and protein, plant and animal, hard and soft, industry and farmer, geological time and biological time, resourceful and perishable. Is Beuys challenging our dualistic approach to the world and our relationship to materials, and in particular to the environment? Is he hinting at something much more important that we are all interconnected and relatable biological systems. The materials that he uses in this work are extracted from the earth. They are not in the long term sustainable. And even now, whether Beuys thought about this or not in relation to Ireland's over-reliance on fossil fuels, it's also interesting to think about the briquette in a historical context. Bord na Móna was originally established in 1933 as the Turf Development Board Limited. And the reason for the formation of the Turf Development Board was to develop and improve the turf industry and to operate and drain bogs. This practice has ceased or is in the process of winding down and has proved detrimental to the environment. Peat bogs play a crucial role in the carbon cycle. They are capable of absorbing and storing large amounts of carbon dioxide, known as carbon sinks, making them ideal for helping to tackle climate change. We can also add the overuse of peat compost in our gardens, which has even added more stress to the environment. So these were all the kind of different ideas and readings I was kind of trying to capture with this work, or thinking about this work. And just to finally say that Beuys has successfully extended his art practice, which prepared the humanistic and ecological foundations for Germany's Green Party, of which he was a member. And for Beuys, modern industrial society's transformation depended not solely, but essentially on the question of whether real changes could be made in agriculture and industrial production, our consumption patterns, and ultimately in the way we eat. And this was just a photograph. Actually, this is a photograph that I took. And I think it's in Roscommon, and it's probably one of the last bogs to be cut now. And I'm not even sure how legal this cutting is. I'm sorry, I can't seem to be able to properly scroll. Oh, here. And then I was just going to finish with one of my projects. So this is called Fortifying Beds, the Potting Shed. And it was a residency project that I undertook in 2013 in a defunct military fort based at Dunree, north of Buncrana on the Inishowen Peninsula. And it was a coastal defence fortification built as a Royal Navy position, and it remained under British sovereignty until 1938. And so I broke up this project in phases. So phase one, spontaneous generations, geomorphological traces of the fort were visible everywhere. And in between these fissures were the settlements of pioneer species. And through seasonal walks, the identification of these diverse communities were tracked, traced, and recorded. And this prompted an in-depth reading of the healing properties or fortifying attributes specific to each plant. And this process generated an archive of the terrain and led to a deeper engagement with the site. Phase two, from plants to buildings. The timeframe for the residency program was extended on my request. And this is because I felt the site was really complex and I needed time and space to digest the material that I was gathering through my engagement as a site of research. And also I was interested to focus in on how or by what means an alternative sensitive engagement that had longevity for the community beyond the constraints of the residency could be developed. So I reviewed the material in response to phase one, and this shifted my attention from plants to buildings. And one in particular lent itself to the possibility of an outdoor multifunctional space. And with improvements in place, the building and grounds were reactivated and developed as a living herbarium, based on the idea of the recommoning of public space. Materials found and upcycled on site were shaped by the hands of a community of volunteers who all had a keen personal attachment to the fort. Raised beds, the area in front of the shed was also cleared, which had all the formal characteristics of a walled garden. The grounds and shed were originally used as a storage depot for machines and fuel. Raised beds were constructed, snuggled near the boundary walls on both sides, and they were planted with seeds collected on site, chosen again for their specific fortifying or tonic healing properties, such as St. John's wort, self-heal, angelica, meadowsweet, skullcap, yarrow, lady's bedstraw, amongst others. From bullets to seeds, the mix in addition I put together, the mix I put together, a fortifying seed bag mix, which on launch day, people were invited to take a packet and plant the seeds wherever, which way they wished, seedling a generative hereafter effect that marked the cyclical, spontaneous process of this project. And finally, the space now continues to grow and is currently occupied by a community garden group called Amach an Seo. And they use the space as an experimental growing ground for gardeners, herbalists, activists, seed savers, and artists. And that's